maybe there might be some groups dissident groups within China that might be supporting the Free Tibet movement. Is that so? Is that something that could be happening at the moment?
Yeah, there are. The most famous one is Ai Weiwei. He's been a strong supporter of Tibet, and he has made a lot of public statement. He's a good friend of one of the most famous Tibetan writer and public figure who has been exiled in Beijing, Tsering Gyatso, and they come on social media every now and then. So he's been one of the strongest supporter of Tibet. But there are lots of Chinese intellectuals, and in the book Dear Dalai Lama we have a few Chinese intellectuals that have written a letter to show of their support and solidarities, but there seems to be a growing number of Chinese intellectuals, lawyers, who are quite supportive of Tibet and Tibetans, and it's something that Dalai Lama and exiled Tibetans have worked really hard to keep that sort of relationship. We have Chinese-Tibetan friendship group all across the world that meet every now and then, and it's something that we expect that more Chinese and more Tibetans will come on board. So there is certainly growing sort of consciousness among Chinese and who are willing to show their support publicly.
Thank you very much to Tsering for sharing your story. But the question that I was asking the whole way through it is, how the hell did you escape? Did somebody rescue you, or did they just let you go?
After I was released, spending 2 years in prison, there is a restriction among prisoners who have just been released that you have to sought permission to leave your area. So even if you go to a next town, you need permission from the local officials. And on the pretext that I wasn't feeling too well, I went to the main city, Lhasa, and I then got connected with someone who arranged people to escape Tibet, that you have to pay a lot of money. I guess people in this country call it people smugglers, but they would help you to escape Tibet. So that's what I did. And to walk across the Himalayas for a few weeks to escape.
Wow.
Thank you for your very moving talk. Just a few questions. China is Australia's largest trading partner. Does our economic dependence on China influence our government's approach to human rights abuses in China and the oppression of the Tibetan peoples and other national minorities? And I'm imagining there may be a hidden clause in the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement which precludes us from raising issues to do with the Chinese government's oppression of dissidents and national groups within China. That's my concern. And also, whenever the Australian government has raised issues to do with the oppression of the Tibetans and political dissidents, and you have also compared the narrative that the Chinese government is spinning in relation to the Tibetans with Australia's narrative in relation to our own Aboriginal Indigenous peoples. Do you think that this limits our ability the Australian government's ability to, or even Australia's ability to defend the rights of the Tibetans and other persecuted groups within China when we have such a bad track record in relation to the treatment of Aboriginal Australians, and we have also broken the Refugee Convention, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and punishment, Manus Island, Nauru, Convention on the Rights of the Child, because the Chinese government has criticised Australia for our treatment of asylum seekers, especially children, and our treatment of our Indigenous people. So surely that must weaken Australia's ability to take up the fight for the rights of the Tibetan peoples. So that's my concern there. And I read this interesting article. The Dalai Lama has stated that he is in favour of a Buddhist synthesis with Marxist economics, as he believes that the internationalist nature of Marxism shows compassion for the poor, which is in line with Buddhist teachings, while capitalism and the hyper-capitalism embraced by the Chinese Communist Party is based on greed, selfishness and rampant exploitation, which I find this quite ironic. So that touches on an earlier question. What are the links between the Tibetan people's fight for self-determination and the Uyghur peoples, the peoples of Inner Mongolia, dissidents, workers, trade unionists, all the people fighting for equality and freedom within China today?
Australia and the West is a direct beneficiary of the current status in China and also in Tibet. I think it's probably fair to say that that it's in countries like Australia interest that the status quo remain the same in China. So there is a strong interest for the Australian economy, in a sense, that the Tibetans remain same as they are now. And in a way, it's a sort of sad circumstance where people in this country claim that they support democracy, that support freedom, yet at the same time they're doing business with one of the most authoritative dictatorship in the world, and that's the Chinese government. And what was the first?
You compared the narrative that the Chinese government has spun in relation to the Tibetan peoples with the narrative that Australia has spun in relation to its own Indigenous peoples. Now, that puts us at a disadvantage when we criticise China, because the Chinese government has repeatedly, whenever we criticise their treatment of people, dissidents and national groups within China, they point out to Australia's treatment of refugees and children, in terms of children in detention centres, and also our treatment of Indigenous Australians. So that puts us at a disadvantage. So surely that certainly limits our ability to stand up to the Chinese government and question them. That's my concern. And the other, there was a quote that I came across in relation to the Dalai Lama, who stated that he's in favour of a Buddhist synthesis with Marxist economics, as he believes that the internationalist nature of Marxism shows compassion for the poor, which is in line with Buddhist teachings, while capitalism and the hyper-capitalism embraced by the Chinese Communist Party, ironically, is just addicted to selfishness, greed and exploitation. So, with that statement, which I find fascinating, the links between the struggle in Tibet for national self-determination, which is in line with the Chinese constitution, I believe, autonomy for Tibet, and the Uyghur struggles and the struggles within Inner Mongolia, and the general fight amongst the trade unionists for free trade unions, peasants who've been expropriated from their lands, all those fights, how they come together. Is there a coordinated movement? Is there the beginnings of a coordinated movement?
I'll tell you this, I guess, short of the reflection of the Chinese, Australian government in terms of appeasing the Chinese government. we have a number of Tibetans who come to Australia every year under humanitarian entrant from India and Nepal. And each year the immigration government release a number of people that have come from number of people who have come from all these different parts of the world under this scheme, humanitarian scheme, and Tibet is not on the list. And so they don't want to even publicly say that Tibetans are coming under this scheme. And when we had the book launch, this Dear Dalai Lama launch, a few months ago at the Parliament House in New South Wales, we had a special guest, Dr. Bob Brown, and he was saying that one of the Liberal MP took him aside and said, "Why are you calling Tibetan refugee?" And you can't. And that Liberal MP said, "You can't use refugee for Tibetans because that's something that gets into trouble with the Chinese officials." So so you can see the larger picture of what it means for how cautious the Australian government is in terms of appeasing whatever the Chinese wants. And usually one of the things that struggle for a lot of Tibetans who come to this country is when you go and register with a different agency. You go to RTA and you go to Centrelink and Medicare, and you have to put where you come from, the country. And there is no Tibet on the list. And every time Tibetans have to explain why it's not on the list. And obviously a lot of Tibetans, they can't put China, mainly because they don't have any documents to prove that they are Chinese. Tibetans are stateless. And a lot of Tibetans can't put India and Nepal, where they've spent considerably amount of time, because they don't have any papers. So you have lots of Tibetans going to these agencies and have to spend explaining the history of what had happened and why Tibet is not on the list. And obviously that poor staff has to go back and talk to his or her manager and spend, for others it takes probably 5 minutes, and for one Tibetan it takes half an hour to do certain documents. And every time Tibetans have to explain where they've come from and why it's not on the list. So you could get a larger picture of how Australia treats when it comes to Tibet. Because first of all, we are not counted in the paper, in the official paper. And second of all, there is, in the country list, we can't put where we come from. Literally, in person, not to meet the Dalai Lama. So, and there you can see how Tibet is, that the Chinese, feel so prickly when it comes to Tibet, that just the mention of name and just the mention of Dalai Lama, and now you can see all the universities. Last time Dalai Lama came, I remember Sydney University cancelled the talk, and after much public pressure they had to reverse their decision. And this happens all the time. And on the grassroots level, I know that there's one or two universities that wanted to do a project that has nothing to do with politics of Tibet, but the Tibetan community, and they were pressured by the department that has been directly beneficiary of funds and donations from the Chinese businessmen, that has a direct link to the Chinese communists, that if you do certain things, certain project with Tibetans, the fund's going to stop. And obviously the university caves in. And we see this quite a lot. even at the university levels.
We are deeply honoured that you've joined us this evening. We were deeply honoured when you joined us at Politics in the Pub previously. Thank you, Tsering, for sharing with us the very significant life experience. You've taken us to the protest march. You've taken us to the arrest. You've taken us with you into the jail. Through your pain, we've experienced your torture. And for that reason, I know I can speak on behalf of the entire Politics in the Pub community when I say this, we salute your bravery. We pray that you will have love and kindness and strength and nurture today and all the days of your life, forever and ever. I know that I also speak on behalf of the entire Politics in the Pub community when I say that we stand with you, all three of you, in the work that you do, through your campaigning, your advocacy, your research, your work with the Tibet Movement, your work with the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies. We salute what you do. We're very proud to call all three of you friends of Politics in the Pub. And more power to all three of you, and may every blessing surround you forever. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Tenpa, Tsering and Karen for being with us this evening at Politics in the Pub.
I just would like to thank the Politics in the Pub, and usually as a mark of friendship, love and respect, we traditionally offer a Tibetan scarf. And tonight we're very fortunate that we have Tsundu, one of the most famous Tibetan from DY, who happens to be here, to offer the Tibetan scarf to Howard and Kathy.
Oh.
So,
This beautiful cup that's been presented to the Politics in the Pub community will be the cup that we will share each time Politics in the Pub convenes at the beginning of the new term, because this is the last evening of 2015 Politics in the Pub. And you can see on the beautiful artwork on the cup that it says Tibet will be free. We stand with you in solidarity, and we will work with you very, very hard every day, forever, to ensure that the beautiful words on this cup with the beautiful artwork will come to pass in the lifetimes of the people who are here with us this evening, and in the lifetimes of the people of the Free Tibet Movement and the Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies and the Politics in the Pub community. Thank you so much for the honour of your presence and for your loving kindness and for your gifts.